today, I have Meaghan Dunham, who is a business mentor and astrologer. And we're going to get into all things astrology and emotional intelligence, which I find, of course, the Emotional Mastery podcast so fascinating. I absolutely love to dig into things from that lens. So, just to start, if you are open to sharing a little bit about your human design and your astrology and anything that you feel really kind of maybe made sense as to like the path that you got on, and then just your story, like as much or as little as you'd like to share, any pivotal moments that sort of got you where you're at today, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Okay. I it's a long story. Of course, everyone has a long story, right? But I'll start at the beginning. When I decided that I was going to go to college, I thought that I was going to be a teacher. That's what I always wanted to be ever since I was little. I have pictures of myself at like 7 years old sitting at an old like student's desk that my grandparents had at their house and pretending to be the teacher, right? So that was like my dream. So I went to school for education and I became a music teacher. And I was a music teacher for a number of years. And it was um, it was so joyful and satisfying. I loved the kids. I worked in elementary school. But my last year, I got really sick and I had to have my gallbladder removed. And I began to realize that a lot of the reason why I was feeling so sick was because I had so much stress. I would stay up late at night worrying about some of my kids and where they were and who was taking care of them. And, um, it was really hard. It was really hard. I didn't feel like I had the support from my administrators, all the stories that lots of teachers tell, right? So, the final straw for me, I think, was when I got really sick and I was only offered 1 week of time to take off after my surgery. And I'll never forget coming back to school and having the kindergartners come to my classroom because as a music teacher, I saw all the kids in the school and one of their teacher, said to all the kids, "Okay, I know you want to give her a hug, but you can't right now because she has a hurt belly," and just the amount of care that we had to take in explaining the whole situation to the kids, and I just felt heartbroken. And that was kind of it for me. So I decided that I was going to move on from teaching and see if I could find something else that could fulfill me and still offer me that opportunity to be a teacher, but in a way that didn't require me to lose my physical well-being, lose my physical health. So I began in the corporate space, and I thought, oh, well, maybe this will be better because I'll actually be able to go to the bathroom when I want to and take breaks. And ended up working as I think a lot of people experience a somewhat toxic corporate environment. And then I just realized that the only way that I was going to really make this thing my own or this experience my own, was by being an entrepreneur. And so I began teaching people about marketing because I knew that that's what I could do, right? Having worked in corporate marketing. And in 2017, I had my astrology chart read for the first time. And I realized in that moment that all of the things that I didn't like about myself, all of the things that I thought were wrong, quote unquote, with me, were actually parts of myself that I could see reflected in my astrology chart. And I no longer felt like they were a burden. I all of a sudden felt like a door had opened and the possibility of me facing those things that I didn't necessarily like about myself. It just felt easier and more approachable. And so that kind of led me on the path of my spiritual awakening. I got my yoga teacher certification in 2019, and I started to incorporate those things into the work that I did. And as someone who has experience as a teacher and someone who has experience working in the social and emotional learning space, I felt that using those tools to help people better understand themselves through their astrology chart in my one-to-one coaching just felt like a really natural fit.
Mm.
And so that's where I am today.
Yeah. I resonate so strongly with just the first time I saw, for me, my introduction to like that sort of world was human design. And very shortly after, because astrology is a huge part of that, right? Was kind of astrology. But I remember the same thing when I saw my chart. I was like, wow, everything I think is wrong with me isn't. It's only because I'm resisting it. I'm trying to fit into this box that I'm not made for. Was the most liberating thing ever. I mean, of course, there was so much work after that to really accept it because then you have all the conditioning and the, subconscious beliefs and like that's still a journey. But to have something that I felt like I could come back to and have the languaging of like, oh, this is what it is. I don't have to be this. I can just be this is so powerful. And, kind of like you, I feel like that was the thing that helping other people see that and have that same experience was like the driver for me too. So it's so beautiful. What in your chart do you feel like, or was there anything that really spoke to specifically like the emotional aspect of it for you?
I think learning about my moon sign
Mm.
was really important for me. When I was young, I would read horoscopes and, 17 magazine and all
Mm-hmm.
those things. Maybe I'm dating myself. I don't
I did the same
know.
thing, like Cosmo and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm an Aries moon,
Mm.
but sorry, not an Aries moon. I'm an Aries sun, but a Taurus moon.
Mm.
And so those two energies are very opposite from one another. And so I would always read the Aries horoscope because I knew that I was an Aries sun. And I never fully resonated with that energy, talking about being a fighter and picking fights and being aggressive. And I just was never that type of person. And it wasn't until I learned about my astrology chart that I learned that I had my moon and my Venus in Taurus.
Mm.
And those are two really powerful placements. And that also my South Node is in Libra. And so there's a lot of this like Venusian energy that surrounds me in the way that I interact with the world. And it helped me understand who I am and be more accepting of the more assertive part of myself that is my Aries North Node and my Aries Sun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm like sort of flipped in that way, like the same energies. I'm a Taurus sun and a Leo moon. So for me, and I have a Leo rising. So kind of that same thing where I felt like, yeah, I did embody some of that grounded energy, but I felt this like fire that was always like burning inside. So I was like, my emotions were super dramatic. Like a lot of the way that I did things was like fast. And so I really resonate with being a Taurus, but at the same time, there was just this piece that I was like, but what about this little like fiery part of me? Like I felt like I constantly suppressed that. So it's sort of the same thing. And then I also have I think we're born the same year because I have my North Node in Aries, my South Node in Libra as well. And so
Mhm.
like all that, like
Mhm.
that, like for me being a Leo rising too, like the sun in Taurus and then Venus. I feel like that whole like little, you can go down that rabbit hole of my chart. It's so fascinating, right? But it really is so prominent to like the experience. But yeah, it's so fascinating just to see like how these little pieces show us and how we resist that part of ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Capricorn rising too, so I have a lot of
Mm,
earth,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
I didn't know that I had that earth. I always
Mm-hmm.
assumed that I was just a fiery person that was living inside of a body that didn't necessarily feel fiery all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can we, whatever our moon sign is, if we're looking from that lens, like lean into that or understand that in a way to help our, emotional world?
Yeah. So it's so funny that I'm talking about this because I'm actually leading a workshop soon called The Head and the Heart, which is
Mm-hmm.
about our Mercury and our moon sign and how they can work together. I think that that is the maybe the first gateway that people can take as they're learning more about astrology is their moon sign
Mm-hmm.
because it's such a personal placement, right? It's our subconscious, it's the way that we see ourselves, it's our inner voice, our emotions and the way that we react to things. And I think that um, just like you said, you knew you had that little fire inside of you, but you didn't know exactly where it came from. And then you realized you were a Leo moon, and it gave you the permission to express that part of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is a really important key to healing perhaps some of the trauma that we've experienced, or to deconditioning, is to understand our moon sign, because that in, within our deepest self is who we are and how we interact with the world, and how we react to things. So if we know that we react by pulling back and dissociating, like a Taurus moon, perhaps, then it gives us the opportunity to build guardrails and to build in systems that we can use so that when we are reacting to something in our environment, we already know how to anticipate the way that we're going to react.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe just describe, like, maybe elementally how
Mhm.
each of us would kind of lean into that?
Yeah, so from an elemental perspective, we have four elements in astrology. We have the earth, which is Taurus and Virgo and Capricorn, right? We have the fire, which is the Leo and the Aries and the Sagittarius. We have the air, which is Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra. I'm trying to think on the chart, right? And then we have the water, which is Cancer and Scorpio and Pisces. So all of those different, we all have different ways of acting based on those elements, right? Of course, each of the zodiac sign represents or manifests in a different way according to the element, but they're all fairly similar. If we think about water, for example, water is very deep, and I think that most people think of our emotions when they think about water.
Mm-hmm.
So someone with a Cancer moon, for instance, is going to be a highly emotional person, a highly deeply feeling person. Because if you think about water and the ocean, it holds so much. And so knowing that about yourself, knowing that you might be more sensitive, more intuitive, more in tune with the energy around you, could give you the opportunity to build in systems that support that extra sensitivity that you might feel in times when you're feeling triggered. Um, Likewise, someone who is an air moon, that is more of an intellectual reaction. So, in the same way that the earth is logical and so can dissociate, I think that the intellectual moons can also dissociate because they're trying to piece apart what happened and trying to make sense of it. And that can feel really draining and exhausting. So, knowing that about yourself, perhaps you're an Aquarius moon, knowing that you like to dissect experiences that you have and have an answer for why something is the way that it is, you could try to soften that a little bit and realize that you're not always going to have the answer. And so what can you build in that supports you when you have those moments where you're not quite sure exactly what's happening?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the fire moons. So like an Aries moon. Of course, fire is known for moving very quickly and for generating a lot of heat. So people who have fire moons often react very quickly to situations. And sometimes the reaction can be overblown or can be larger than perhaps it needed to be at the moment. But that's just the way that people with fire moons are. And so understanding that your reaction might be big and impulsive, what can you do to build in systems to support you in those moments so that you're not running around, trying to put out all the metaphorical fires, and you're not feeling, really angry or, really frustrated in that moment. And then earth moons,
Mm-hmm.
which coming from speaking from experience, I think that the dissociativeness of an earth moon comes from the fact that they're in the same way that air moons, I think, are trying to find an answer. Earth moons do as well. But there's this sense of trying to keep your feet on the ground during a crisis. And I noticed that about myself, that when other people are kind of spinning out around me, that I'm always the one who's kind of bringing people back together and trying to chart the way forward. And that can feel very overwhelming because sometimes I want to spin out, but I don't feel like I can because I'm the one who has to kind of hold everyone's feet to the ground. And so knowing that about myself, then what are the things that I can do to support myself when I need to have that opportunity to actually just release that
Mhm.
energy.
Yeah. I love that. I haven't heard it put that way before. I am someone who, for some reason, constantly attracts Capricorn moons. And I'm like, we are so not compatible emotionally just because I'm so dramatic. But I've learned to like love them because they're so grounded, right? But
Mhm.
maybe like you said, it's because they feel this obligation to like hold that they can't like get wrapped up in their own stuff. But I'm like, just meet me
Mhm.
here, come here, be dramatic with me. And they're like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of obligation. I think that
Mm,
comes with all of the earth signs.
yeah. How can we like when we're looking from the lens of business, because I think specifically entrepreneurship is this ever evolving journey of self discovery in order to like be in it and like remember like why you're doing it because it's challenging. But how does that, how can we work with specifically that moon energy and like whatever way that shows up in our business? Because I mean it can be super emotional, right? And learning to like separate that while staying authentic is kind of a challenge.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would challenge people to think about it not in the way that you're separating things, right?
Mhm.
Because as an entrepreneur, you really can't separate the personal from the professional.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that entrepreneurship is the deepest way to get to know yourself. It's the best course that you can take in self-development. And the more you know about yourself, the more successful I think you will be.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I look at, from the perspective of your moon specifically, is I look at what does your moon sign desire? And then what can you do to create that desire inside your business? So going back to my moon placement, I have my moon in Taurus. So that means that I desire stability.
Mm.
So how do I create stability in my business? Maybe that means that I create monthly recurring revenue because that helps me understand every month that I'm going to be receiving the same amount of money, and therefore it gives me the stability I need to be able to branch out and do other things.
Mm-hmm.
Leo moons need creativity. Right? So how can you build creativity into your business? How can you build in, maybe you do new seasonal offers every once in a while and you try this, that, and the other, and you keep things fresh because that's what your deepest desire is as a Leo moon.
Yeah.
Maybe as a Gemini moon, you love learning. And so, how do you add in those opportunities for learning new things and incorporating the things that you learn into the way that you're structuring your business and the way that you're interacting with your clients and your audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. How do you, so going back to sort of, like you said, you're doing that workshop on like Mercury and the moon, which I find is so fascinating because I've often tried to, or like just in understanding those, my Mercury is in Taurus as well. And then my moon is in
Mm,
Leo. So it's like there's all this fire, but then feel like I have to communicate it in this like really grounded, practical way. And sometimes the ideas take a while to like percolate, right? To the point where I feel like I can communicate them.
mhm.
So how are you like pairing these two together and like how does that work for us?
Mm. So I haven't fully formulated the workshop yet, but I am reading a book that has been very helpful for me to understand the relationship between those two planets, especially when you have a Mercury placement and a moon placement that feel like they are not working together.
Mm,
So I think that the first thing to recognize is that we all have dissonance in our chart. It doesn't matter where it is.
yeah.
And the more we can understand that the dissonance is a place of growth and a place for curiosity, the easier it becomes to begin to integrate those things together. So obviously, I think particularly as women, it can be difficult for us to work with our head and our heart. because our head sometimes, I think, more often than not, feels like it's fighting against our heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why it can be really important to understand what it is that what fight are they having? What it is that, what are those conversations that are being put forward?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, for instance, my Mercury is in Pisces and my moon is in Taurus. So they're both very slow moving.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that mean? But then it's the water and the earth, right? And so the water and the earth together can mean that I have a really hard time moving things forward, that I stew over them before I bring them to life. And so in that sense, I'm seeing, okay, what are and I look at this from the Ayurvedic perspective as well, because I study Ayurveda. And when I think about the elements of water and earth, I think about mud.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens with mud is that there's this kind of like you get stuck, and then it's really hard to move out of that. It's almost like quicksand if you let yourself sit in it for too long. But mud is also very cooling and very soothing. And so I have to kind of come at it from a multi-lens perspective of, okay, well, I recognize that it could take me a little bit longer to make decisions because I have all these things moving around in my head and my heart. But once I actually do bring those things to life, here are the qualities that I can enshrine in those ideas, in those services, in those offerings that are going to bring forth the best of me. And the best of me might be this really grounding and supportive energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And I liked what you said about there's always a part of our chart that holds some dissonance, right? And I think that's the beautiful part about really getting to understand you through the lens of your chart, because I think just as humans, we're always going to experience that in some level, right? And
Mhm.
of course, like our conditioning and just all these messages of like, especially like you said, the fight between like the heart and the head, right? Of like, this is what I think, or this is the thing that's been conditioned in here, but then this is what I truly like desire and what I want, and being able to like have those meet somewhere in the middle, and I
Mhm.
think, I mean, emotional intelligence is, I was just having a conversation with somebody, and it's just, I think it's one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves. Like, even, I mean, even for me, like having a fire moon, like I'm so dramatic, but like learning to like take that pause, and it's not to like stop what I'm feeling or stop my experience, but it's to like see myself through it, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
and so I think that's like the
Yes.
power of, but before I knew I had a Leo moon, I was like, I can't be this dramatic, like I can't have these intense emotions, like it's just wrong, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's the beautiful thing, is being able to step back and be like, no, it's not wrong, it is what it
Hmm.
is, and also
Hmm.
like, how are we going to move through this? So I think that, combining that, with business, I think is so powerful. And
Hmm.
I feel like I had like a reading with somebody who, he was a Capricorn moon, but he was like super successful, like businessman, and like he would tell me about these situations where people would come into his office just like all heated and things like that. And I'm like, that Capricorn moon is so beautiful in that situation, because you're not being like pulled into the emotional world. That stability of the earth moon was so like, I could see it played out where he would just like respond to people as like, okay, and how are we gonna move through this? But people would want him to fight. Like people come in like
Hmm.
looking for an argument or looking for a fight. And I think just like understanding the dynamics of all of that is
Hmm.
so cool to like watch it being played out. And
Hmm.
yeah, having that emotional intelligence to know like not to get sucked into it. Because so I
Hmm.
think without it, right, we're very reactionary.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think as humans, um, especially living in such a chaotic time, it is very easy to react just at the flip of a hat and not take any responsibility for your reaction. And I think that is where emotional intelligence comes in, and particularly understanding your innate qualities or your innate impulses through your astrology chart can be super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Is there anywhere else in our chart besides just like the moon that we can look at to understand or to work with this part of ourselves?
I think yes. I think that each part of our chart can help us understand ourselves in a different way. Um, I think that another part of our chart that speaks to the depth and the subconsciousness would be our Neptune placement.
Mm,
And Neptune is a generational planet, which means that people within a certain period of time are all going to have that same placement. So people who were born around the same time as me are going to have their Neptune in Capricorn.
mhm,
And one of the things that I find so fascinating, I've read dozens of charts at this point, and a lot of people who've come to me have had their Neptune in Capricorn. And there's this deep sense of responsibility for charting a new way forward that I see in a lot of these people who come to me with that placement, particularly as it relates to our subconscious and healing our subconscious, healing our inner child, healing our, um, our doing the shadow work. And that can feel like a really heavy burden. And I see it in a lot of people's faces when they come and have readings with me. And I think it's important to recognize that one of the one of the beautiful things about Neptune is that it allows you to go really, really deep. But one of the hard things about Neptune is that because of that depth, there is often a desire to stop and just kind of look away. It's too hard.
mhm,
And I think I would encourage people to, when we're thinking about doing the work, the emotional intelligence work, the shadow work, the inner child work, don't push yourself too hard. I think that is a trap that people fall into,
mhm,
especially women who are conditioned to do it all and be it all. Um, take baby steps. Don't feel like you have to get to the end as quickly as possible. This is a process, it's a journey, and it's more important to experience the full um, range of emotion that comes through the journey rather than being focused on the destination.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important. And it's something that's so hard to like really be in, especially I don't know if it's just all my fire energy, but I'm like, no, I want to be there now. Like I know in the beginning of my journey, that's why I was like, I need to figure out the fastest way to get from here to there.
Mhm.
And then I think through the process, it just has this beautiful way of like, it'll just drop in little pieces as you're ready for it. Like you
Mhm.
you actually can't rush it. Like there's no way that you
Mm-mm.
can, right? And I think that in that rushing process, we're resisting it. I always, for some reason, and I think because I'm looking at my chart like Placidus, like my Capricorn is my sixth house, so I
Mm.
always forget that Neptune is there because Neptune is in my fifth house, right? So I'm like, oh, Sagittarius, but it's not. It's in Capricorn, and I always forget about that piece of my chart. So it's interesting that you bring that up, and I think that especially with that Neptune and Capricorn, right? Like doing the depth and doing the work like around work, I guess, right? With
Yeah.
Capricorn. And then that need or the possibility, I guess, of escaping it, right?
Mhm.
It's like, I don't know. I mean, obviously, like addictions and burnout and disassociation and avoidance and all those things that can come with that energy towards
Mhm.
work it makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to remember that this is a collective
Mm-hmm.
energy. And so it's not one that you have to, um, it's not a journey that you have to go on by yourself.
Yeah.
That there are a lot of people within your same generation who are experiencing the same thing that you are, of course, within different houses and that sort of thing. But overall, knowing that this is a collective journey, I think can help um, us really think about how we rewrite those stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you work with the transits?
I do-ish. I am more of a birth chart reader, so.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, I sorry. I was like, I heard the siren. I'm in Texas, so they put off those sirens like at noon on Saturdays, and so I was like, what is happening? I know there's not a tornado. I forgot about it.
Oh.
I don't know if you could hear it. It distracted me for a second.
I heard it just a little tiny bit.
Yeah, it'll pass.
That's so funny.
Yeah. But as far as like the transits, I'm always curious. Just, I mean, I work with them in the sense of like I use it a lot for reflection. I find that I can't
Yes.
like I track them and I know it's coming, but it's never until I'm past it that I can actually have the like perspective of like, oh,
Yes.
that's what was happening in my life. That's why.
Hmm.
I like
Same.
for me, Uranus has been on my sun, which I don't know what degree your moon's at, but I'm sure Uranus has been passing over it at some point in the last, what, 8 years or something like that. But it
Hmm.
was literally just, I mean, my sun is at 24 degrees of Taurus. So it's been like hovering over that for a while. And I like recently quit my 9 to 5 and it's in my 10th house. So I like quit my 9 to 5. I was like, I'm burning it all down. Like I can't do this anymore. And then afterwards I was like, oh shit, that's what maybe like I let the pressure of that like get to me, but it is what it is.
Hmm. Yeah.
But
Yeah. My home and roots is in Taurus as well.
mm,
So I got married.
mm,
And so I think that for me, that was like the huge shift and change for me was that I never thought I was going to find someone to be with for my entire life. I was this kind of like fiercely independent woman, Aries sun,
mm,
right? And then in 2022, I met my husband, and it was like, well, just kidding.
yeah.
So for
I
sure.
love that. I love that.
Mhm.
So you bring in a little bit of like those ancient modalities, right? Like Ayurveda and
Mhm.
things like that. How do you work or do you work with that with clients? Like as you're reading a birth chart, are you taking into consideration those things and how do you weave them in?
Yeah, so we take a look at for Ayurveda specifically, we take a look at their elemental composition in their chart. Do they have a lot of earth? Do they have a lot of fire? And what I've noticed is depending on their elemental composition, it can often tell me what their Ayurvedic constitution is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not familiar with an Ayurvedic constitution, in Ayurveda, there are 5 elements instead of 4. So it's still earth, water, fire, air, but then there's another one called space or ether. And those 4 elements are comprised, or they're they create 3 different doshas, is what we call them. And basically, what happened is that these Ayurvedic scholars, thousands of years ago, they were looking at nature and they were observing what was happening, and they noticed that the combination of elements came together in 3 very distinct ways. The first is kapha, which is earth and water. The second is pitta, which is water and fire. And the third is vata, which is air and space. And what I can often see in someone's chart is if they have, for instance, a lot of fire, then they're definitely a pitta. Like there's no, especially if one of their big 3 is in a fire sign. More often than not, when we go through the Ayurvedic quiz and we learn a little bit more about their lifestyle, they're for sure a pitta. And so then that really kind of helps me from a coaching perspective to help them build in guardrails for where they may suffer burnout or where they may get stuck or where they may dissociate or where they may start something but never want to finish it. And I think it's just one extra tool that is really supportive in helping not only me, but also my clients understand more about themselves. The really neat thing about Ayurveda too is that it moves with the seasons. So right now, we are at the end of Vata season and the beginning of Kapha season. And so what does that mean as far as the transition of energy? And how does that impact a person who's Kapha? Or how does that impact a person who's Vata or Pitta? And I can see how, I help my clients see how that energy might be more supportive during certain times of year, to, launch something or to create more space in their business or to even go on vacation and just let themselves live for a couple of weeks or a couple of days or whatever they need. And I just find that the intersection of those modalities can be really extra supportive
Mm-hmm.
in creating a business that feels more energetically aligned for the people that I'm working with.
Hmm. How do you find ether in a birth chart?
So that is a hard one, but I think that most of the time when I see someone has a lot of air placements in their chart, it points to them being a vata.
Mm.
So there really is not necessarily a something that completely translates to ether. But I would say that um, and I think it's interesting too, actually, because in some cases, someone like a Pisces who has Pisces energy, where we know that Pisces has the predisposition to kind of space out, if you will,
Hmm.
that could be seen as a space energy.
Yeah.
So it's really more about understanding the energetic qualities of the different zodiac signs. Of course, definitely the elemental qualities come into play, but there can be a little bit of a second step to the process.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say I mean, just like my knowledge of ether, what the first two that I would think of was like Pisces and Aquarius, just for like
Mhm.
that fact of being like, yeah, kind of like out there. And like, I always describe Pisces as like being in the ether. So you're not like grounded right quite here.
Yeah.
And I know it's water, but that was kind of my first thought as it relates to that. It's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. So how are you like if we're again kind of pivoting back to that lens of like business, like in what stage are you working with people? Is it like in the beginning of their business or they're trying to stabilize it or grow? Like is there, or all of the above, but like is there a place that you find people typically come to you?
Mhm. Typically, I have people come to me when they are in the very beginning stages of their business. So within the first 5 years, I've had some people come to me who've been entrepreneurs for a number of years, but there's always some sort of beginning
Mm,
that's happening with them. So perhaps they're starting a new business, or perhaps they've moved and they have to kind of start their client base from the ground up. There's always this sense of a seed that's been planted that they are looking for nurturance and guidance to help grow.
mm-hmm. Have you noticed like a common thread through like their charts or anything?
That's a good question. I think that obviously one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of people tend to come to me with the same generational planets.
Mm,
So people who are within that same born within that same time period. But I also noticed that there are a lot of women who have placements um, that would point to them being more open-minded.
mm,
So I have women who will come to me who have a lot of Sagittarius energy. They're like, oh, yes, like give me all of this, like philosophical stuff. I
mm,
want to sink my teeth into it. I also have people who come to me with that Gemini like curiosity energy where there's this kind of innocence about them that they feel like, they desire someone to kind of spark that next period of growth for
mm,
them. And I think that as someone who also has a lot of earth placements, I tend to attract people who are opposite from me,
mm,
who desire the strength and stability and um, perhaps, I don't know if rigidity is the right word, but structure
mm-hmm.
that comes with me being a Capricorn rising, for instance.
Yeah. Is there anything that, so I know we've talked about Mercury and the moon and Neptune and things like that, but like if somebody's coming to you beginning their business, besides like the emotional aspect of it, is there anything that you're necessarily seeing in it to maybe help them like clarify their vision?
Mhm.
Or like do they already have an established business or they're trying to like figure that out through the lens of their chart?
Most people that come to me already have an established business. So they've already kind of figured out what their purpose is, but they're really struggling with how to bring it to life.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we can look at their astrology chart for specifically when it comes to business is their midheaven and where's their 10th house,
Mm-hmm.
right? Obviously, that is a very important part of understanding your public life. But I don't necessarily think it's the only piece. So it's almost like the first piece of the puzzle. We'll look at that puzzle piece first and we'll say, okay, well, how, for instance, if your midheaven is in Scorpio and your 10th house is in Scorpio, how could that manifest for you? But I think it's really important not to put words in people's mouths,
Mm-hmm.
and to hold space for them to discover what it means for them, rather than saying, okay, well, you have a Scorpio midheaven, so that means that you are going to be someone who just goes in and gets really deep with people and helps them, you know, pull out the roots. Um, could be that, or it could be, something completely different. Someone who has a Libra midheaven doesn't necessarily have to be a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a very literal depiction of what it means to be a Libra midheaven. Someone who is an Aries midheaven doesn't necessarily have to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Like that's again just a very literal depiction. And I think that people will sometimes come to me with those preconceived notions. And I think it's really important to hold space for the discovery that it might be something that um, they might actually already be doing it, is what I discover a lot. That they might feel like, oh, I'm not really aligned with my midheaven. I don't really understand how that works. But then as we dig a little bit deeper, they begin to understand that actually, oh, yeah, I am exhibiting these qualities just in ways that I hadn't really thought about before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it definitely is like a holistic thing and it's not like one piece or the other. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in just like this one aspect of it that's gonna like unlock the key or unlock the like all the answers, you know?
Mhm.
So I think like, yeah, looking at it from that like broader lens of how is it all kind of playing into that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Mhm. How do you feel like your experience, like even just like with music and teaching, has like brought you to where you're at today? So even just like I feel
Well,
like I hear it in the way that you speak, like I can hear that sort of like that like teacher energy, right? Of being
mm,
like in a session with somebody. And I think that's
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I find it hilarious that my Mercury is in Pisces and that I was a musician. I am a musician.
Yeah.
Like, it just feels very literal to me.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that I learned through music specifically, because I was and still am a vocalist, so my body is my voice, or
Mm,
is my instrument, excuse me. My voice is my instrument. And I remember doing a podcast interview with someone years ago, and she asked me the same question. And I thought to myself, actually, I think what it is for me is that when I was a singer, I was sharing this very deep and intimate extension of myself out into the world through my voice.
mm-hmm,
And I think ultimately that's what we do as business owners. We have this little seed that's inside of ourselves and we nurture it until it grows and then is shared with the world. And it can be very scary because it's this really deep and intimate part of ourselves. And I think that being a person who has familiarity with the power of bringing that up and out to share with the world through music has been a really beautiful guiding light for me as an entrepreneur and as a coach.
mm-hmm. How do you still incorporate music just like in your everyday? Like are you performing places or is it just something you keep for yourself?
I still teach.
Okay.
Yeah, very, very rarely nowadays. I haven't really taught in about 10 years, but
Mm,
I do teach little tiny ones. And I think that that's part of the joy for me is that I wanted to be able to ultimately get back to the joy that I felt in being, in sharing music.
mm-hmm.
And I think that sharing music with little tiny humans who are still in those very formative years, is just another beautiful way for me to bring joy into my life.
Yeah. I love that. I think kids, I have two. Mine's 14 and 8, but my 8-year-old, my 14-year-old, she's kind of gone through her conditioning now and like society and friends and school and stuff like that. So she's a little bit more hesitant, but my son will just like bounce around singing. And I think it's just such an authentic expression that like kids don't necessarily feel the fear of like, oh my gosh, what are they going to think about me? You know, like he's just everywhere singing in the shower. And, you know, I think it's a really authentic expression for everyone that I think sometimes we disconnect from as we get older. Like I even for me, I'm like, I could never sing in public. Like, I don't think I'm good at singing, but like, but I do love like, I mean, like most people sing in the shower with my kids and stuff like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I also, you know, I went to college a couple times and I finally got my bachelor's degree in photography because I was like, I need to do something. Maybe it's that the Leo moon, the creativity was like, I need to do something that really like ignites my passion and is creative. But then I found when I did it professionally, I lost my passion for it. I was like, I think it was the exchange of money for something that I felt so deeply for that I was like, I can't do this anymore. And it was always by somebody else's standards and not mine, which is where I feel more, and it's probably just age and growth and experience now where I have my own business and now it's kind of like by my rules. And if you don't, or maybe it's just the ability to communicate like what I do and what I offer and not be like, well, what do you want from me? You know what I mean? It's like the more
Mm-hmm.
empowering thing of like, I'm going to attract people who are here for me that I didn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I just, because you had mentioned, you know, you hadn't taught in a while. And I think that that is maybe something that's very, maybe not talked about or that's common where we lose the drive for something that we feel so passionate about because of that, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it has to be that way, but I think it's an experience for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that that's one of the beautiful things about being an entrepreneur is that you have the opportunity, if you feel like you are not being fulfilled and you feel like things are not moving in the direction that you want them to, you have the opportunity to move in a different direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I think that like early experience with, I guess like at the time I wouldn't have considered myself an entrepreneur, but if I was, I mean, that's basically what it was. It was a photographer, right? Like it was my business. I was taking pictures of people, but it was the inability to express what I wanted to do, right? It was
Yeah.
more so like, I feel like the lesson there was in being able to stand in like what I do
Hmm.
and to be able to say no to people. I
Hmm.
like back then, like this is like my early 20s. I couldn't say no. It was like people wanted me to do all sorts of pictures and weddings, and I literally I can't stand doing weddings. It's not a passion of mine, but I found myself doing it for the paycheck, you know. And
Hmm.
so I think that lesson of being able to be like, no, I actually don't want to do this because it's not going to fulfill
Hmm.
me. And maybe you know, as you like, I think you too. We've just gone through our nodal return, and that was like a huge wake up call for me,
Yeah.
where I was like, I know where I'm being led and I can't stay in this box anymore. And so it's just kind of
Hmm.
like, yeah, I think just age. Age
Yeah.
is like is a beautiful thing and we are all like afraid of it. And I'm like, there's like simultaneously like society, right? Where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting older and I look different and my body looks different. But then at the same time, I'm like, but it's also so exciting. Like the older I
Hmm.
get, the less I care. And it's not like a selfish thing. It's just like I don't care as much about what other people think about me anymore, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a mentor who talks about the midlife transits, and I don't know a lot about them, but the nodal return at the age of 37 is kind of the beginning of the midlife transits,
Mm-hmm.
and it is so fascinating to me how much more comfortable I am in my skin
Yeah.
after that initial experience, and now knowing that I have all of these other transits to look forward to all the way up until the age of 50, and I'm actually really looking forward to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's challenging. My kids, they were like, I can't remember when it was a few months ago. That my kids are like, Mom, are you middle aged? And I'm like, not yet. Give me the next 4 years.
Let's not
But
talk about this.
right. But like I do notice, it's just that I think is a conversation we don't have enough. That aging conversation, because even you know, I listen to my mom and she's in her 60s, and the like almost like unwillingness to admit that aging is a thing, or like
Mhm.
the avoidance of the conversation of it, and it's I don't know, like I mean, you know, everybody has their things, you know, and like I said, sometimes I look in the mirror or I notice like I tried to do like something working out the other day and I noticed my knee cracked and I was like, oh, like come on. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I just think like the evolution of who I am is so beautiful at this age, right? So I think
Mhm.
like looking at it from that way is really cool.
Definitely.
But how do you, so the, kind of going back to the whole, like, the emotional intelligence, how do you feel like since your evolution, or since you first discovered this in 2017 until now, like, how do you feel like your relationship with your own emotions has like shifted? Like, where was it then? And kind of like, what has the evolution been to be where you're at now? And like, where do you think it's going?
Mhm. So I look back at my 20s in particular. So in 2017, I had just entered my 30s. And I look back at my 20s in particular and I cringe a lot.
Mm,
Um, I was a person who felt uncomfortable taking accountability. I was a person who constantly felt like I had to live for other people rather than living for myself. I felt a huge responsibility to maintain certain standards. And when I had my astrology reading, I think I realized for the first time that it was okay for me to live the life that I wanted to live
mm,
and to not be so focused on being someone else that someone wanted me to be. I think that it was then that I began to realize that my passion for certain things wasn't something that I had to be ashamed of. It wasn't something that I needed to, that I couldn't follow. I think so. When I was a teacher, I was really afraid that I couldn't be anything else other than a teacher because I had a master's degree in education. I had spent all this time and all this money focusing on being a teacher.
mm,
And in a lot of ways, I felt like I had failed everyone when I decided that I didn't want to be a teacher anymore. And in 2017, that was the first year that I wasn't teaching at all. And I think that if I had not had that astrology reading, I know for sure that I would still be working in corporate and I would not have my own company. I would not be an entrepreneur because in some crazy way, I think a lot of it conditioning, I felt like I wasn't worth it. I felt like I didn't have the skill set that was needed to be able to bring all of these things that I was so passionate about to life. I was afraid that that people wouldn't listen to me, that I didn't have the authority to speak on XYZ. And I think that that moment sparked in me this deep desire to prove everyone wrong.
mm. Capricorn. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting how, in our 20s, we spend so much energy and money in our education to create this like identity, I guess, for ourselves. And then when it kind of crumbles, we're just like, wait, what now? You know? I mean,
Mhm.
I bounce between different things, but like even just having that final degree of like photography, I'm like, I'm a photographer. And then like for me, it was 2015 when I stopped. No, 2000, might have been 2017 as well. Yeah, when because I had my son. So yeah, I think it was around the same time. And I was like, same thing. Well, I didn't go into corporate. I went to a gym and then I went into corporate. But like
Mhm.
that shift of not doing that creative work anymore,
Mhm.
it's really interesting. And I also think like that Saturn return and there's this piece about I think
Yes.
that 30 to 31, that age is so interesting because it's like everything that we knew for some reason around that time. I don't know if it's because of our Saturn return, but it's like everything that we thought that we knew about ourselves is like all of a sudden confronting and like not. And then you're like,
Mhm.
wait, I have to build all over again, and then
Mhm.
like finding, I think through that, finding that thing that really like gives you that fire. And some people are fortunate to find it in their early 20s. I wasn't. I was, you know, going crazy, partying very much in my, I have Jupiter and Pisces. So I was just very much in that like phase of my life where I'm like, I'm just going to drink and, have fun. And I mean, I had my daughter young too. So that was a part of it where I was forced to, I wouldn't say forced to be a mom. I'm blessed to be a mom, but like, I don't know. when I look at it, my daughter's 14. I'm like, man, in 10 years, if she had a kid, I would be like, wait, just wait. Give yourself some more time to figure yourself out. But we
Hmm.
all have our own journeys. So I don't know. It's
Hmm.
interesting. Mm.
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you feel like, just in like kind of coming into a conclusion of this, or not conclusion, but like what advice would you give someone kind of like coming into this? And also like what advice would you have given yourself, like in hindsight, looking back at like, the earlier version of you to who you are now?
Hmm. Well, I think that one of the biggest things I would have told myself is don't be afraid to take up space.
Mm, love that.
I, as a child, it's funny to think about because as a very young child, I took up a lot of space. I was always very active and talkative and friendly. And then I had this really traumatic experience around the age of 5 that pushed me into a shell of myself. And I can remember being in kindergarten or first grade and wanting to audition for a play at the community theater. And I so desperately wanted the main part, but I was so afraid to speak that they wouldn't give it to me.
Mm,
I was terrified to speak. And of course, my Chiron's in Gemini. So um, I think that that was the biggest lesson that I started to have to deconstruct and to learn was that it was okay for me to speak and to share my story and to take up space. I think that particularly for me as a woman, I was conditioned to be the one who was in the background. And I know that a lot of other women feel that way as well, that it's important to be quiet and it's important to be more submissive and to make everyone else happy rather than make yourself happy. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that in making yourself happy, you can then fill the cup of others. I have a friend who used to say to me all the time, selfishness is the greatest form of altruism because when we can be fully fulfilled, we can then fill up other people. But when we're trying to fill other people from this emptiness, it's not going to work.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's really powerful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and,
Mhm.
helping the audience kind of like get in touch with that piece of themselves, and specifically through the chart. How can they find you? How can they work with you? And is there anything that you're currently working on or putting out in the world?
Sure. So I have a membership community called the Venusian Society that I absolutely love. It will be one this year in June. I'm really excited about it. And it is for female entrepreneurs who are in the very early stages of their business, who are looking for ways to incorporate all of these holistic and spiritual modalities into the way that they build their business. So that registration for that is always open if anybody's interested. And then I actually do things called stellar strategy sessions where I help people understand their astrology chart as it relates to their business. And then we take a look at what's happening for them over the next 3 months. We do it on a quarter by quarter basis. And try to better understand when things will be supportive for them to make certain choices in their business.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. And where can they
yeah.
find you?
Website. So it's meaghanmdunham.com. I'll make sure to give you that because my name is spelled kind of funny. And you can find me on Threads and you can find me on Instagram at meaghan.m.dunham.
Amazing. I'll link it all up in the show notes so they can just go click
Yeah.
it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.